Hey everybody, AwesomeMattG here, and today we have another novel idea video, and we're going to be covering World War Z by Max Brooks. And today, again, like normal, I have Capricious joining me.
Hello.
So, I read the book first, but I read the book in its standard form. I guess you could call it abridged because it would be considered abridged now, but it was the original form that came out.
Mm-hmm.
And then I told you needed to read it, and when you read it, you got the
Unabridged.
the unabridged, like the additional like 10 more chapters or something.
A lot. I mean, none of them were necessarily integral to the story per se, but it really fleshed everything out.
Yeah. Some of them. And then of course I went back and reread it with the additional chapters in the order that you read them in. And I was like, granted, reading it the way I did the first time was fine, and I got the full story, quote unquote, the full story. But rereading it and getting all those additional chapters, I was like, oh my god, some of the additional chapters are so good.
Yeah, I was looking that up because I had Wikipedia open when I was listening to the audiobook, and it has everyone's, like, all the chapters and who read them, because of course it's a full cast reading, so it's got actors reading each individual part. And it would have, like, I think it was just asterisks or something that denoted that this wasn't in the original book or whatever. And there was just a lot of chapters that I really loved that weren't in the version you read.
I'd have to say that just as an estimate, in the longer version, maybe 20 to 25% of the book was added on. It's a significant chunk.
And like I said, all of them were just... It was really good because I think it added a lot of heart to the story. I guess it's sort of the quote-unquote unimportant stuff, because it's like, oh, well... I think one of the... I can't even remember now which ones were or weren't. But...
I can remember some of them. Like for example, there's one closer to the end about the Paris catacombs.
Oh, right.
That... I remembered it specifically because in the full cast reading audiobook version, which, by the way, if you guys want to read this, well, hopefully you've read it already, but if you want to read the book in audiobook, absolutely try to find the full cast reading, because the full cast reading is amazing. But it was read by one of the actors from Deep Space Nine.
Oh, right.
His name is Rene Auberjonis or something. It's his last name is a French last name, and I always butcher it. But are you looking it up or something?
I'm looking up the World War Z book just so I can open up the wiki again and see if I can see it.
See if you can see which chapters were added on, type deal.
Yeah, I want to say it was yeah. Yeah, and there are if you go to the wiki, there's the asterisks are the ones that weren't included. Let's see, Rene Auberjonois. Boy, all you French people are gonna scream at us. Auberjonois, maybe? Auberjonois? I don't know.
I never took French in high school, and it's been a long time since you took French, so. But yeah, he was... I recognized his voice immediately, because I was really into Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and he's a main character in that show, so I was like...
Yeah, and of course, I'm not familiar with that, because I have not watched DS9. Oh, like, looking at this, there's so many good ones. Like the the Martin Scorsese one that was read, which was the one about the
About phalanx.
about phalanx. That was
That is
such
a
great
good one.
story, because it so many of these, what it is a lot of these stories aren't, again, they're not required, which is why an abridged version is fine. But like I said, fleshing it out is a really good way to put it, because that makes you realize that this guy, you know, people were so desperate for a cure and hope that he was passing off like rabies medicine, because they were calling it rabies and saying this will cure you, and people, it made him a multi-millionaire.
Yeah, this is why the character had to live out the rest of his life in Antarctica to stay away from people after the fact, because he knew people are going to come to try to kill him.
Yeah, stuff like there's the one with Denise Crosby. Was that the one where
I remember the Denise Crosby.
Yeah, because she's Star Trek as well, right?
Yeah, she's Next Generation.
She's the one that was, I think, in Montana or whatever, and it was just a quick blurb talking about like her gathering up her kids.
She was the one that figured out how to build up the trailer stacks.
Right. So, although that's not necessarily important to know, okay, as we continue on after the apocalypse basically happened, she's was important in how they now rebuild houses and homes and things so zombies can't physically get into your homes.
Right.
Because in places like, you know, up north in Montana, things, building houses on stilts the way you see them built down here, there are certain houses that you go more towards the water that are built on stilts. That to us is normal.
To us it makes sense, because it's like, well, if a hurricane comes, you're going to have flood waters. You don't want the water getting in your house, so you build it up on stilts. But in the middle of Montana, where they don't have problems like that, people are all like, why would you build your house on stilts?
Yeah, that's stupid.
That's
It's unnecessary.
Yeah, it's a waste.
But yeah, just chapters like that you miss out on if you don't read the unabridged version. It really does add to the story, and for me, like I said, I just can't imagine not having read those chapters, because if you
Japanese teenager as he's scaling down the building.
I loved that one.
That was not in the original.
That was one,
that was actually one of the longest chapters in the book.
That was one of my favorite added on when I realized you hadn't read that, because it's one of those things that I think we all have the tendency to be like, oh, if the zombie apocalypse happened, I'd be able to do this, and I'd dual-wield swords, and I'd be a friggin' badass. And the reality is you wouldn't be. This was a guy that was a Japanese gamer for all intents and purposes. I mean, he wasn't like professional. He, lived with his family and played video games.
They had the term in the chapter, but it's a term for like a shut-in.
Right. In Japanese culture. And it talked about how he was on like whatever floor of this apartment building.
It was high up. It was like the 20th floor or something.
Right. And it talked about his struggle of tying together bed sheets, which he realized was so stupid. And it would take him sometimes a day to scale down one floor, one floor to the balcony. It would
take him an entire day.
Because there was the realization that he had no upper body strength. He didn't have lower body strength. He didn't have any of these things. He didn't have the right equipment or tools to be able to do all of this. He didn't have food. And that's the reality of what most people would be. And most of us wouldn't be able to. I mean, Jesus, if you were like, okay, Cappy, there's a zombie coming. You need to run, 3 miles to get away from him. I'm going to be eaten. Because I'm not sure I can run 3 miles even on adrenaline. You know what I mean? Like, it's easy to beef yourself up in your mind, but stuff like that is a definite reminder that
you are not prepared.
Yeah. And actually, the really great thing about reading this book is there's a lot of that. There's so much focus, or the main focus is basically when the zombie virus apocalypse happened, no one was prepared. And that was the true reality of it, of no one knew what to do, and news companies didn't know what to do. And
That's like the unofficial, in my mind, the unofficial main character of the book is Todd Wainio, voiced by the insanely amazing Mark Hamill.
He's so good in that.
He's such a good voice
so
actor.
good in this book.
But because I think his character has either 3 or 4 chapters along the entire length of the novel. But even he goes to the extent of explaining it's not just the civilian population that was completely unprepared for this. It was the military,
Right.
because he's a military officer, and they talk about specifically the worst defeat, at least for the United States, during the zombie apocalypse at Yonkers.
Battle of Yonkers, yeah.
Yeah. And he's talking about how, it looked awesome because you have hundreds and hundreds of troops, and they had giant tanks, and they had, rockets, and all these really advanced weaponry, and, laser sights on their guns, and because they had never experienced an enemy like this before, and then they shot the one missile that's supposed to go and explode, and with a human, like a living human, it'll create this shock wave and this fireball that not only will burn you and you breathe in the fire and it singes your lungs, but the shock wave is supposed to damage a bunch of your internal organs, and if it doesn't kill you, it's going to completely incapacitate you. And they use this, and they realize all it did was light a couple of the zombies on fire, and the rest of them just kept coming because they don't use their internal organs.
Right. Headshots are the only thing that, or severing the head, I believe.
Yeah, well, it was severing the head and destroying the brain.
Right.
Because you have to destroy the brain one way or the other. Severing the head.
Well, yeah, it's still a live head. It can still bite and chomp, which
the
they
body
learned.
is useless.
Right.
But the head is still alive. And then he talks about that the entire military training, as you're going up through basic training and stuff, they focus heavily on body shots.
Right.
Because they're you have to hit the chest, because not only is it A, the biggest target, but B, all of your vital organs are in there. And if you can hit the heart or a lung or something like that, you're going to kill your target quickly, whereas if you shoot it in the head, your chance of missing is really high because it's a small object.
Right.
And so all these military guys are trained to shoot for the chest, and it's really hard to try to get them to figure out, no, you've got to aim for that tiny target on top.
Well, yeah, and that's what he was talking about. They were fighting a war that they didn't know how to approach. They were using weaponry that was not made for the targets they were using, and it was completely overwhelming. And the worst thing about the Battle of Yonkers is that it took away all hope of winning this war. There was the realization that we can't do this, and military and citizens alike saw that we're screwed.
Yeah, because the military and the media alike both saw this going in thinking, we're going to wipe the floor with these zombies.
Yeah.
And so they were televising the whole battle.
Yeah, for people to watch and cheer. And
yeah, people were going to be like, yeah, look at how easily we can kill all these zombies. And then to have the zombies completely just decimate the U.S. forces there and show us that all of our advanced technology was utterly useless against them. And, and they had to fall back and retreat. And you're just
and a lot of soldiers died.
Yeah, a lot of soldiers did die because they started using all their big weaponry on the places where the zombies were, which now also included the foot soldiers.
Well, and the zombies also just overwhelmed them.
Yeah, there were millions because it was right outside New York City.
Right. Well, they talked about it was this almost like a stampede. This slow-moving wave of zombies.
Yeah, they said they had that really new feature where they had the heads-up display on the soldiers' masks.
Oh yeah, so you could
could see the battle from an aerial point of view, and they just looked and it zoomed out, and you saw that there were just millions upon millions of zombies stampeding out of New York City.
Right.
And there was maybe 4 or 5,000 soldiers, and they just immediately, it was this huge morale, was just devastated.
Right.
They're like, how can we're having problems against the 2 or 3,000 that's in front of us, and there's like 5 million still coming.
Right. And I think this book did such a good job of kind of feeling like it was a realistic version of what would happen, because you go through all of the like, okay, it started here and this is why it spread so easily. A lot of it was misinformation and not knowing what it was. There was also
Chinese cover up.
Yeah, China's government knew about it and they covered it up. There was also a lot of smuggling, illegal organ use that spread.
That was another chapter that was in this longer
the Brazilian
version.
one?
It was the Brazilian heart surgeon, the cardiologist, and talking about how he was getting, quote unquote, and I mean, granted they were, illegal organs.
From China.
Where the zombie outbreak started. And he would get the organs. Obviously, they'd have to get there very, very quickly to keep the organ alive. So he would implant them in patients from relatively wealthy countries that just couldn't get organs.
Right.
So these people from Western Europe and from North America would go down to Brazil to get this illegal organ transplant so that they wouldn't die.
No waiting list.
Yeah, no waiting list. You pay like, $20,000 and you go get this illegal heart and boom, you're good.
Yeah.
And that's when they realized that the spread of the zombie plague wasn't isolated to people that have been bitten.
Right.
It could be transmitted via organs that had come out of either recently bitten or almost about to turn zombies.
Right. And one of the things they talked about what made it worse is that depending on the size of the organ or what they were getting transplanted in was how quickly the virus would spread inside their body. So something like, in this case, they talk about him putting a heart in, and it was relatively quickly, but he talked about he put other things in,
kidneys
or livers, or even just like I wanted to call them tubes, but they're not called tubes in your body. But like valves and things. And
Yeah.
Small things that get put in, even stuff like corneas or any ocular things that.
Maybe even, he doesn't go into this much detail, or at least I don't remember that he did, but maybe even something as simple as like skin grafts.
Yeah, I don't think he did either, but yeah, exactly. And that would take it would take a lot longer for the virus to metabolize inside your body. So you're also, this person goes through their surgery, great, I feel great, and now they leave and go back home, but they've got this virus building in them, spreading until it takes over.
It may be 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, and that was the problem, is there was a lot of that, because they had been doing these surgeries for a while, so thus spreading it for a while.
This guy wasn't the only guy doing it, obviously.
Exactly. So, and that kind of stuff happens. We have black market organs now. We have governments, and I'm not just talking about foreign governments, I'm talking about our own, that cover things up. And a lot of it is done, for people's own good, to not cause mass hysteria or not cause, issues and stuff. But that's the problem, is with this, it was this bubble that was growing, and by the time it burst, it was too late. There was literally no way they could contain anything.
Yeah, it's over.
And that's really the way it would happen. And I found this book just takes you through such a wonderful wave of emotions. It felt like no other zombie book I had ever read, because it really wasn't like, it's called World War Z, an oral history, I believe.
Yeah. An oral history of the zombie apocalypse.
Right, and it really does feel like it's this historical account. Like, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. It feels like you're reading or listening to this account from, like, this really happened. We really had the zombie apocalypse, and these are normal, everyday people or government officials talking about how it happened. One other thing we should mention is the way the book is structured. This isn't really a narrative per se. Like, it's not a... It's not... I mean, it's a story because it's a book. But, I mean, it's interviews. Each chapter is an interview. So it's Max Brooks, the interviewer, going to... say, like, when he's interviewing Todd Waino. Wainio, sorry.
No, you're good.
He's asking him questions, and Todd Wainio is responding to those questions and telling stories within those questions. But it is sort of like you're reading a dossier file where you're reading these interviews that happened, or of course listening to them. And again,
yeah, it's kind of like dossiers.
Listen to it, but it's not just a straight up like normal structured story. It's each chapter is, okay, I interviewed this person, okay, now it's this person. So you have like a setup. It's like, okay, the interview is like, okay, we're in China, this and this. Like, he gives you an idea of where you're at, who he's interviewing, and then he starts interviewing the person. But it doesn't flow like it's like you're reading a questionnaire or anything like that. It flows like a narrative, but it technically is interview style.
I mentioned this to you and a couple of my other friends when I was first reading the book and when I was rereading the book, is it felt a lot like, for those of you who've watched the movie Interview with a Vampire, or Interview of a Vampire, I forget.
It's Interview with the Vampire, I believe.
Okay. But yeah, it feels a lot like that, where it's just like, it's the guy going and just saying, like, hey, I'm here with this guy and we're just going to talk about stuff.
Right.
And then they just start talking. And
then it kind of switches perspectives, and you're listening to the story and paint a picture, but then every now and then it goes back to the interviews happening.
It goes back to the narrator, asking another question or prompting him to go down a particular road of his story and it just feels really good. It's when you describe it to somebody, it sounds like it would be a little clunky.
It does. And honestly, when you first wanted me to read this, and you were like, you have to, do the audiobook because, it's just so wonderful. I was really skeptical about it because I'm used to just the way I just read Game of Thrones. I'm used to books that read like that, where there's dialogue and there's story, and it's just, it's normal, quote unquote. So doing this where it was an interviewer asking questions, I was like, this is going to feel so clunky, and it's going to, like, I don't think I'm going to like this. I was trying to keep an open mind, but I was really assuming that I was going to be like, okay, thanks for the recommendation, bye,
Yeah. And then you got like 2 or 3 chapters in, and you were all like, oh my god, this is so good.
You really, in a way, you kind of forget that it's an interview. Reading this style, I read another book that was the exact same style, where you're reading, in this you really are reading confidential files. And again, it's interview style, and I was like, as long as it's done well, and this is done well, it
feels really good.
It feels just like any other story.
There's one particular chapter I want to put off until the very end of this novel idea video, and I'm pretty sure you know which one that one is.
Can I guess the name? Or do you not want me to say it?
Let's leave it off.
Okay.
You are correct. Let's just say that. But I want to go back to some of the other chapters that we really enjoyed throughout the novel. We've covered some of them already, obviously. I'm going through this list I've got here. Like one of the things that I think was covered really well, and it's one of those things that's in other zombie apocalypse style stories, whether they be written or film or something like that, it's kind of glossed over, is how the media responds to the zombie apocalypse.
Oh yeah, that was really wonderful.
The one that I really liked was, I'll go over this one and you can go over the other one that we really liked together. Is I really liked the one where they were talking about how the media didn't think through what they were trying to do. They were trying to be helpful, and they were trying to tell people how to protect themselves, but they didn't go into enough detail. So it's like the media would come out and they would just tell people, hey, that we've figured out that zombies don't do well in cold weather.
Right.
So what everyone should do is they should pack up and go north. It doesn't matter if you're in North America or if you're in Europe/Asia, just go north.
Go where there's snow. Go where it's cold.
Go where it freezes. And so it made sense. And the masses thought it's obvious.
And it was what everyone was saying, go north, go north, go north.
Right. So people got in their cars and packed up what they thought was important and drove north. And the story, the particular chapter is about a family. I forget what state they started in. They started in some place like Pennsylvania or Ohio or something like that. And they drove into Canada. And it makes sense. It's good. Canada's going to freeze over faster than the northern United States would, for obvious reasons.
Right.
But the lady's talking about how her family didn't think everything through properly. They packed up enough food and water to last a couple of weeks.
But I mean, it wasn't just her family, it was
everyone.
It was everyone. And that was
granted.
The thing, is the media just said go north. They didn't give any instructions beyond that.
And they're talking about how people were going north with like TVs and video games and all these fun electronics, when they should have taken every piece of warm clothing they had, all the food that they could cram into their vehicles, where people were taking a couple of weeks worth of food thinking this is going to be like a vacation.
Right, it's going to be a couple of weeks and it'll be over, where it was months and months.
It was the entire first winter. You had to survive the entire first Canadian winter, and some of these people are like Americans from like Florida.
Well, and no one took medicine, like not even like Sudafed or, cold medicine, nothing for the inevitable.
Yet, let alone some of the more serious medications that people need.
Right, and in her specific area, they had like a nice lake and it was great, but they really didn't think long term, because they were talking about using dynamite to fish the lake.
Yeah.
And it took only a couple of weeks till the lake was dead. It was
dry.
It was
devoid of all fish.
And they still had months and months to live there with no food. All food had run out because she talked about like singing campfire songs with all the other people that were in that area camping with them. They thought it was a vacation.
Granted, that in the grand scheme and long run of things, that's a good idea. You want to get people together and you want to keep morale up. So singing things like campfire songs is great.
Right.
But they were doing this like on day 2. They were burning themselves out of all the important stuff very, very quickly.
Right. And that was the problem, is the media didn't know any better of what to do, and it caused a lot of mass hysteria, and they called it the Great Panic, because that's exactly what it was. And the media did nothing to quell that.
Hundreds of millions of people just got up and left.
Yeah.
And that creates this huge logistical problem that if you don't plan this way ahead of time, things are going to go wrong, and things did.
We have issues where people, what was it, where they were trying to evacuate cities for like certain hurricanes and stuff, and people would run out of gas on the highway because it was so congested, the roadways were. Imagine that. But even like times 10, this even bigger and grander scale. And it was just...
Yeah, we're not talking about the people in Florida trying to get away from Hurricane Matthew. We're talking about the entire population of Mexico and the United States all trying to fit into Canada, all in a period of like a week. Everybody wants to get there.
Well, she talked about when they were driving, there were lots of people on the road walking because cars ran out of gas. Her dad even talked about it, like, we can't afford to stop and get gas here because cars get overwhelmed by people that are walking.
Right. Because they're all like, I need a ride. And then eventually they end up stealing your car.
Maybe they're in that position because someone did that to them.
Yeah.
And it's desperation. People do desperate things when times like that happen, and that certainly was one of them.
Yeah, and that was very enlightening, because it was like, this makes perfect sense.
It's the reality, no pun intended, the cold, harsh reality of what it would be to flee the zombie apocalypse. What would happen?
And then we had the director, which took place, kind of halfway through the entire
Well, right, because this book
situation.
has stages. I mean, obviously, this is all past tense. The zombie apocalypse has happened. For the most part, humanity is won. There's still zombie cleanup going on actively, but we have it under control.
Yeah, there are pockets of zombies still.
But one of the things that they talked about is, and they gave it a name, it was asymptomatic demise syndrome, or ADS, or ADS. And it was literally during the zombie apocalypse, people just giving up the will to live and dying or becoming zombies, because morale was completely gone.
It was so foregone. Yeah, exactly. It was so foregone that people would just lie down in the street.
Right.
And just wait for death to come.
Right. It wasn't even people just laying in their houses. They would literally just walk outside and go and sit on the curb and wait to be killed. They had no will to fight, to live, to do anything. And it's so horrible.
I mean, technically this syndrome exists in real life.
Well, of course.
But it's when they're talking about it in the realm of the zombie apocalypse, it had become an epidemic.
Right. That's yeah, exactly. Here, I mean, it's not.
I think they talked about, at the time, there was something like anywhere between 150 and 250 people a day.
Yeah.
Doing this.
Just giving up the will to live for various reasons.
Yeah, and
for obvious reasons.
That is way too many people dying,
becoming zombies
unnecessarily.
Right. And so what the director did is he basically kind of created propaganda films where we would go out and fight these zombies, but like completely vanquish them. I mean, it kind of, they talked about, a lot of it was almost like old school sci-fi, where they would use like lasers and disintegrate the zombies and things like that. But it was really, really necessary, because it
pumped up morale.
Yeah, we were literally at that point losing the war. We were struggling.
Well, I think by this point they had mentioned that the United States had been pushed over the Rocky Mountains.
Right.
From the East Coast all the way over the Rocky Mountains. So we only had maybe like 20% of the U.S.
Right.
And rest
everything
was
else
just
was
zombie
gone.
wasteland.
Right. So suddenly we had this filmmaker that started making these films that, because there was this realization that we need more than just guns to fight the zombie war. We need morale. We need people willing to step up and fight.
Yeah, people that would still be willing to go out and do something about it, rather than just, give up and die.
And they talked about that they were so successful, they had him make multiple films, because it was doing exactly what it needed to be. Needed to do. It was giving us hope when hope was dead.
Yeah, one of the most impactful back and forths during that interview, and obviously this isn't a direct quote because I don't remember word for word what it was said, but basically the interviewer asks the director, hey, you shot some of these films and they're famous now for, like, you shot them with this laser off of this like giant cannon thing and it just completely disintegrated the zombie, and he's all like, why didn't we just roll those things out? Obviously they were devastating.
Right.
And the director's like, no, you don't understand. First off, there were only like 6 of these laser things in existence. Secondly, it took like 15 or 20 minutes to charge this thing up to kill this zombie that we had tied up against a wall, and it used metric tons of electricity that we just could not expend. And he's like, it was an utter waste of money, and it was a horrible idea as a weapon, but it it got people excited.
It looks cool.
It looks awesome. And people were like, yeah, we can vaporize zombies on the battlefield. This is going to be awesome. And he's all like, yeah, we didn't use it.
No, of course
We didn't use
not.
that machine at all.
Actually, they talked about that. I don't remember what it was called, but in the end, one of the most effective weapons was this kind of modified club.
It's a Lobo.
Oh, Lobo.
Right.
That's what they called it.
Lobotomizer.
It was the lobotomizer.
It was a cross between like a military camp shovel and a pick, and it's basically, if you've ever seen the thing in like hardware stores that's come out in the past 5 or 6 years called the FUBAR. It's like a crowbar and a hammer and a pick and a hatchet and a whole bunch of tools all in one handled object. That's kind of what I picture when they talk about the Lobo.
And it was the absolute most effective thing because it killed zombies one blow to the head and they were dead. And you didn't even have to use a lot of force.
No, because the object itself was heavy and
right.
dense.
So if you didn't have a lot of strength, even someone like me could kill zombies
easily
with this weapon. And that's what ended up, that was the weapon that was and is still used, of course, in this world to kill remaining zombies. It's easier.
It doesn't take any ammo. What's the it's one of my favorite quotes. It comes from another Max Brooks film a Max Brooks book called
guns don't need swords don't need reloading.
Yeah, swords don't have to reload. It's like
Zombie Survival Guide.
Yeah, the Zombie Survival Guide. When choosing a weapon, you want to get a weapon that has ranged ability, like a gun or something like that. But you also need to have a very effective melee weapon because swords don't need to reload.
Right. Ammo runs out. And we were running out of ammo.
Yeah.
And not surprising.
They even talk about the fact that when the United States started its offensive to push back against the zombies and take over the amount of land that we had lost, they talk about the new gun that they got was this just really crappy, like, modified rifle with random wooden butts to them, just made out of like chairs and stuff like that. But they were like, the gun was just stupid reliable. It never ever broke. It never jammed. It always shot. It had a medium distance to it, and it was pretty darn accurate. It didn't need laser sights or scopes or any of this advanced technology. It was just this stupid little gun that was just ultra reliable.
Yeah. And that was what we needed at the time. All our cool weapons.
It was this, they called it SIR because it stood for Standard Infantry Rifle.
But yeah, stuff like that is things that we don't think about. Thinking about, propaganda films, they were used in, say, like World War II and things for a reason. Is because they work, good or bad. They work.
Some of the bad military stuff that happened was it Russia or the Ukraine?
The Ukraine.
Where
I know exactly which one you're talking about.
Yeah, where the military was getting so desperate that they had a problem with zombies in crowds of humans.
Well, they were trying to, basically, borders were closed off, and I don't just mean like country borders, I mean like city borders.
Yeah.
And they wanted to let humans, non-infected people, into certain areas for obvious reasons. You don't want the infected going. And they were doing full strip searches, like you have to get naked in order to be allowed to cross, because they needed to see if there were any bites or cuts or scratches or anything. But that was slow, it was ineffective, and it wasn't 100%. Because not everyone had a bite or a scratch.
Yeah.
So go ahead. Sorry, I just wanted to give the setup.
Yeah, Israel was really good about that, actually.
Right, but we're talking about the Ukraine.
Yeah. And so they got to the point where they just figured, let's not worry about it anymore. We need to make sure that we kill all the zombies. So, what's the easiest way to kill all the zombies in this situation? Well, we just need to kill everything.
Yeah.
So, the Ukrainian military decided that the best option was to just chemically bomb everyone.
Yeah, this whole crowd of people, they're all standing there. There's hundreds of thousands, if not maybe a million or so, standing, waiting to be let through. Terrified people, and the military guys didn't even realize it was going to happen. One of the guys saw the planes overhead and was like,
Why are there
planes? And there was the realization that they're about to drop chemical weapons, and he was able to get him and his team inside the tanks.
Right.
And seal it off.
Right. And then the chemical weapons just killed every single living human being.
And then, of course, the zombies reanimated.
And then they were able to pick off
And
the
they were
zombies.
able to pick off the zombies. But
mission accomplished. We killed all the zombies.
Right.
But you know, the zombies made up probably 15% of the entire group.
Right.
So you had just slaughtered hundreds and hundreds of thousands of innocent people.
Oh, yeah, and that knowledge spread because there are other chapters where they talk about, I think was where we were in Russia, and she was talking about how the Russians dealt with it, and they were like, at least we weren't like the Ukrainians, at least we, or it wasn't even them, it was also like the ones that were in Canada. Everyone knew what the Ukraine was doing.
Right.
They knew that they were dropping chemical weapons, well, bombs or whatever, on their own people to get rid of the zombies. And it was this horror of, this is how desperate we are to fight this, is that it doesn't matter. Everyone's going to die, basically.
Yeah, let's just take as many zombies with us as we can on the way out.
Right. And that's, again, doesn't do a lot for morale. But yeah, every country dealt with it differently, and not everyone dealt with it well. I mean, obviously, we created mass panic, telling everyone to go north and not giving information. Ukraine dropped, used chemical weapons. Places like, and there were places that couldn't do anything. They talk about places like North Korea. Everyone went underground into
like these tunnels, or
these honeycomb tunnels, and they're like, we don't know if they're alive or dead in there. There could be millions of zombies living underground right now in North Korea, and no one wants to go check.
Yeah, they're like, we're in North Korea. We see the entrance to these tunnels.
Right.
But nobody wants to open it.
No one wants to open that door, because right now they're sealed in.
Yeah, it's either there are millions of North Koreans under there that are safe-ish, hopefully they took enough food, or it's full of zombies. At which case, if you open the door, you just released millions of zombies.
Right, and this was at a time when we had already had everything finally under control. The last thing we wanted to do was unleash another wave.
Right.
So, I mean, every country dealt with it very differently, and I can't say that anyone dealt with it superbly well. We did what we could, or we did what we thought was good at the time.
This is a perfectly smooth transition into what we consider the best chapter of the book.
Into Africa.
South Africa specifically.
Now, are we going to give the huge spoiler?
No.
Okay.
We'll wait until the end for that one.
Okay. Because if you haven't read the book, don't immediately stop right here. Yes, because
go read this book.
Yes, because this kind of spoiler, I probably would have ripped Matt's head off if he had given me the spoiler. It is so crazy.
And mind-blowing.
It is.
So we're interviewing this guy in South Africa, and he's describing the South African plan, what's referred to throughout the entire book as the South African plan, which is widely accepted as a horrible idea, but the best thought out plan. It was
a shitty solution, but it was the only one that worked.
Right. Everybody, a lot of countries had tried all kinds of things and everything failed, and the South Africans tried this terrible, terrible solution, and it worked perfectly. And what it was is he describes the situation where, you know, we need to create a like a scoring system where every man, woman, and child in South Africa gets scored versus IQ, temperament, you know, how they were raised, what
age,
their age,
education,
health levels, you know, everything. And he ranks these people in this ranking system, and they say that they decided that the top X number of people would be moved into this safe area because that's all they could guarantee with their military was
Right.
they could protect this big of an area, so we can only support this many people. And then they took the other people and put them in safe zones.
Basically almost kind of giant cages.
Yeah, camps. You know, I pictured them as just, you know, like a fenced off a living area.
Kind of like internment camps where
Yeah.
you can't leave.
Right,
And I mean, just as bad as internment camps, really.
right.
Because their sole purpose was fodder, basically.
They
to
were
attract.
bait.
Yeah, they were bait. To attract the zombies. And because if you have all the zombies concentrated in these certain areas, you can kill them. But the reality is everyone in those camps were expendable.
Yeah. The main camp was protected by the military, and
Right.
every other camp was kind of left to their own devices. And they mention, all the South African governance people mention, if they live and we can go and rescue them later,
Oh, we will.
great.
Yeah.
We will absolutely do so. But if we try to bundle more and more people in here, it will attract more and more zombies to the point where our military can't hold them off, and then everyone dies.
Right.
So we had to score these people and get rankings and figure out if we can only protect the top, like, 5,000 civilians, let's make sure that they're the most capable to rebuild the country.
Right. It reminds me of what's Spock saying, where it's the life.
The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one.
And that's exactly what this was. Is that, yeah, it's really sucky that Matt and I got put in these camps because we didn't score very well and we were used as bait, but isn't it more important to keep the people who can then repopulate and give us a
successful
society to rebuild when it's a complete wasteland? Isn't that better? And of course people hated it, and they absolutely hated can I say his name? Well,
Yes.
it's the government. It was Paul Rediker.
The guy's name that came up with it originally
Was Paul Rediker. And people hated him for this. It was disgusting to them until they realized, crap, he's right.
Yeah, because
We have to do this.
it basically, in the long scheme of things, they did it, and most of the camps were overrun and destroyed, along with all of the civilians within them. But the main camp was protected with all of the important people.
Right,
and
no one there died. The zombies
right,
did not
and
penetrate.
a few of the outlying camps made it through.
Right.
So they went and rescued them and brought them back in.
But they were able to eradicate the zombies in Africa because of this plan, because of strategic camps that concentrated the zombie population and allowed them to go in and kill the zombies just in that area.
Right.
And quickly.
Right.
But
And
at what
then-
cost was the
Yeah.
problem?
And it's one of those things where it's like, is there such a thing as acceptable losses? And that's a difficult answer to, or it's a difficult question to answer, because it depends on who you're asking.
Well, exactly. And people looked at this as being worse, since they're like, okay, Ukraine dropping bombs is terrible. But everyone was like, nothing was as bad as the South Africa plan, because it wasn't just killing everyone. It was saying, you're not good enough to live.
Right.
How do you do that to someone?
Right.
How do you then separate even loved ones? Like, what if you score high enough and I don't, and you don't have a choice? You have to leave me behind to know that I'm going to die.
Right.
And that's what it did. It separated parents from their children and so on.
Right.
But it worked. It was actually, that was the biggest turning point of the war.
At least on that continent.
At least on that continent. And that was finally when people realized we can do this. And we used kind of offshoots of their ideas in order to help us fight as well.
We didn't do the exact same thing.
No.
Because the exact same thing was horrible.
Right.
But we slightly modified their plan so that it wasn't nearly as bad, and was able to make it work with a little more difficulty, and, you know, we were able to push back after that.
Right.
And then at the end of the chapter...
Because you're just interviewing this guy that's talking about...
the whole situation.
He's
giving the historical...
the historical perspective of everyone hates Paul Rediker, and everyone would wish that he were...
that he was dead.
That he was dead.
And then the narrator goes to leave, and he goes to the front desk and signs out, and it's... you realize that at the top of the form, it's so-and-so mental institution, and it was like, who were you visiting? I was just talking to Paul Rediker.
I've got so many goosebumps.
It blows your mind.
Yes.
At the time. You're just like, holy crap. Because the whole time, the guy he's interviewing is talking about Paul Rediker as though Paul Rediker is the worst person ever.
Yeah, the scum of the earth. People would love to get their hands on him if only we knew where he was.
Yeah, people would tear him apart.
And I never saw that twist coming.
When I first read the book, I didn't either.
And I asked you about it. I was like, okay, I need to know if you saw this coming. And you were like, did you read about Africa? And I was like, yes. And you were like, no, I
did not see it coming at all.
And it is, it's my favorite chapter, probably, just for that reason. I mean, there's so many great chapters, but that one I remember the most just because of...
it was such a mindfuck.
It was. But it was
just
so good.
You had no idea. Because the entire chapter, the guy's talking about how terrible Paul Rediker is. And you're like, okay, this guy obviously hates the dude. So the dude's either A, gone into hiding, or B, been killed.
Yeah, you assume that. Naturally. Yeah. Kind of like...
the dude earlier that made Phalanx.
Right. Let's see if I can find his name really quick. Breckenridge Scott.
Yeah, was that Martin Scorsese?
Yeah, Breck Scott.
But yeah, and it blows your mind when you read that the first time, and I was floored.
I was too. In fact, it almost shook me up where I was like, I need to take a break from the book because I was not expecting that.
Because I read the audiobooks when I drive back and forth to the office, and I had read this chapter and it ended halfway to my drive, and I just stopped the audiobook and drove the rest of the way in silence because I couldn't fathom that they had just done that. It had blown my mind. I don't know what else to say. It was amazing.
One of the other things I want to talk about as we start to close up is the aftermath.
A happy chapter?
We'll end with the happy chapter because that one's nice. I want to talk about the National Re-Education Act.
Okay.
This is something that you don't think about where, okay, the zombie apocalypse, let's say, is over, quote unquote. We're still doing cleanup. But for the most part, we now need to rebuild.
Right. And
so they had to create the National Re-Education Act because there's this realization that we need blue-collar workers. And hey, you used to be a high-power attorney. You're a janitor now.
Yeah.
That's your job.
You know, all these, especially considering that a lot of the survivors ended up being Californians because they retreated to California where it was relatively safe. They had a lot of, filmmakers, producers,
script writers, actors.
All those kinds of things. And they were like, right now, your skills are utterly useless.
Yeah, they talked about where...
We don't need you to write a sitcom.
Right.
We need you to build homes.
Where they talked about the one lady was really kind of, I don't want to say horrified, but taken aback because she had been like a multimillionaire kind of film person.
She was a, what's it called where you find the person for the role?
A talent scout.
A casting director.
A casting director.
That's what it was.
And she was being taught how to clean from the lady that was her cleaning lady.
Yeah.
when she lived in her mansion, and now the cleaning lady is her boss.
Right.
Because, of course, the cleaning lady already has those skills. You don't have to train her. She's in charge of training others.
Right.
Because you think that, oh, well, you know how to clean, you know how to do these, not on the scope and scale of what actually needs to be done, and not
Yeah.
for someone that hasn't done it for themselves in years.
Yeah, the entire population of the United States went from like 330 million to like 5 million.
Right.
We need everyone to rebuild the entire country. And it's going to take a hell of a lot of work.
Right, and that we did have a ranking system where people were ranked based on what their previous job was
Versus how useful it was
versus
right now.
how useful it is right now. And it's not to say that these people won't eventually return back to being lawyers or things like that, but someone like a lawyer is not necessary during the zombie apocalypse. Now, if you were a doctor, yeah, we need you. You're not going to be repurposed.
Yeah, that's different.
But you're a casting director, that's useless.
Yeah, we don't need
So-
you to cast shows.
Yeah.
Get out there and clean houses and figure out how to repair plumbing.
Mm-hmm.
We need electricians, we need plumbers, we need carpenters, we need general construction workers.
Yeah. Everyone, like I said, we need blue collar workers. And that's not something I think I ever considered, because I think for the most part, when you read zombie novels or you watch zombie movies, you're in the middle of the panic. You're in the middle of everyone's becoming zombies, run, fight.
Yeah, those stories normally end with either A, everyone died, or B, we've beaten the zombies, the end.
Right. There's the cleanup isn't shown.
No, but it is so important.
Right,
And
it's necessary.
they point all this out in the chapter, and you're just like, this is not anything that I've ever thought of before.
Mm-hmm.
But when you pose it to me like this, it's almost like, why has nobody discussed this? This is so important.
That's the way I felt. Is I was like, I never even considered that, because you consider a lot of the panic and stuff that would happen, and you consider it makes sense when they're like, oh, our weapons didn't work, and those things that you may not have necessarily thought about make sense, even with like the Japanese student where he was out of shape and couldn't scale down things. Okay, that makes sense, of course. But the actual cleanup, I never even thought, like, you wouldn't be very useful. You're an IT person. Right now we don't need computers, really.
I would be on the first line of people to eventually go back to their
Right.
regular job, because as they started getting,
Technology
running again, I would be necessary for repairing and maintaining it.
Right.
But yeah, initially, I'd be relatively useless. They're like, we don't even have electricity right now.
Right.
So you being able to fix a computer is basically useless.
It's weird to say that I would be more useful for you than you, just because I've got a psychology background, and
Yeah,
I would
you could go into
counseling.
counseling.
Right.
And doing that kind, because there's going to be a huge necessity for counseling.
Of course.
Because all of the survivors are going to have seen loved ones, very close loved ones, die.
Absolutely.
And most of them will have seen it with their own eyes. And
Yeah.
not just know, oh, my wife died.
Like, no, I was standing next to
Yeah.
her when it happened. I couldn't save her.
Yeah, knowing like I watched my wife get beaten and then she begged me to kill her so she wouldn't turn into a zombie, and I had to kill her with my own hands.
Yeah. And people, that kind of stuff happens.
That kind of stuff. And that's just, there's no, there's coming back from that, but there's no coming back
I
from
know
that
it's kind
kind
of
of thing. You know what I mean?
Thing is, like, again, in the movies, when stuff like that happens, your friends get killed in front of you. Everyone has that initial panic and they're like, no, okay, I just got to keep going. But what happens when you don't have to keep going?
Yeah, what happens when you've won and you
Right.
can sit down and actually take stock of what's happened, and you start running through all this crap in your mind that you've seen and done and everything, and it just all comes pouring down on you at once.
Yeah.
Mental health is a very important thing, and a lot of people just completely skip over that.
Right. So the final chapter, and actually this was a
bonus chapter.
and it was one of my favorites.
Yeah, mine too. It was really nice.
Is Darnell Hackworth, and it was read by Common, and I thought he did a really good job. Everyone does such an amazing job. There were a couple that I was Jerry Ryan, is that her name? Jerry Ryan.
Jerry Ryan. Her chapter was rough because she's an American and she was reading a Russian chapter, and she she does a very obvious American trying to reproduce a Russian accent.
Right.
And
it's not great.
It's
her chapter was still really good. I think she had 2 of them. Hers were really good. They were interesting. But
it's
you
just
have to ignore her accent.
Her accent was bad.
It was bad casting on that part. But I really thought Common did a really great job, and he really made me feel.
He was so calm.
I think that was the thing, is the way he talked. Well, he had the dog in his lap.
Yeah, he had
and every
that
now
really
and then,
old dog.
Every now and then, it was noted. What I like about this narration too, is there's sort of like, where the narrator will verbally say, as like an aside of like, he stops to pet the dog.
Yeah.
Or he talks to the dog and rubs its ears. So you also get the visual of what the person is doing. Because there were a couple of times where he's like, "It's okay, little miss, you're good." Like, petting this dog. Because that dog's literally seen some shit.
Yeah.
And that was this particular chapter. It's one of the final chapters, but it is a feel-good chapter. Is we have canine veterans. And dogs were absolutely instrumental in our victory.
Yeah.
They were basically some of our turning point, is bringing dogs into it.
Right. Because they had trained, and he mentions that some of the best training dogs, like, you think to yourself, oh, we used dogs in the zombie apocalypse. Obviously, we were using, like, labs and German Shepherds. And he's like, no, most of the dogs were very small dogs, like dachshunds and chihuahuas and stuff like that, because we needed them to get in and out of very tight places and be relatively unseen.
Mm-hmm.
And, so he's talking about how they would use the dogs as scouts.
Mm-hmm.
They would strap like little Wi-Fi cameras to the dogs, and the dogs would go running and investigate a building, because the humans don't want to go into a building.
Right. And the zombies didn't
they don't register on dogs immediately.
Right. They do register on any living being, because they talked about some of them like trying to dig out rats and stuff.
Yeah.
Some of the dogs were used as just ratters.
Right.
And that was also helpful for getting people food, which sounds shitty because you're like, I don't want to eat rats. When you're starving to death,
yeah,
a rat's better than nothing.
You'll eat anything.
Yeah, you will literally eat anything. And some of them were used as ratters, also just killing the rats so they didn't attract zombies.
Right.
But anyway, sorry. The dogs were used as scouts. They were sent into buildings.
Yeah. And they're used for multiple different things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he mentions, there were specific military officers that were obviously assigned to dogs or small groups of dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And, they took care of the officers a lot, but a lot of times the higher-ups in the military wrote these dogs off as equipment
mm-hmm.
and not, living beings.
Well, he talked about that he hated dogs.
Yeah, when he was growing up. When
he was growing up and before the war, he didn't care. He wasn't an animal person. And now he's rubbing rubbing the dog's ears, and he's
running a canine
retirement.
Yeah, this is a retirement home for dogs.
It is, though. It is. It's retired canine veterans.
And he cares for them.
And they're all really old. They're not useful anymore. That was a big problem, too, is the dogs, when the war was over, they were so trained as they lost their usefulness. And there was some mental issues even with the dogs. So it was necessary to have these sort of like homes and safe havens for the dogs.
Even the dogs saw some shit.
Well, yeah. I think,
and they're not immune to from like PTSD and stuff like that. They get that too.
Oh yeah, dogs, they got brains. I mean, they're just like us. I didn't know I was started to say that.
I know what you mean. You realized halfway through how silly that sounded. But
I realized it halfway through that I was going to say dogs are people just like us, and I was like, that's not right. Okay, say they have brains. I was like, that sounds stupider. But it was too late.
But you're like,
but no,
dogs have mental issues.
They do.
Just like humans
just
do.
Just like we do. And so it is important And he does. He takes care of these animals. He makes sure their mental health is great. But he really talks about how important using these dogs were to our success. Without them, because they could go into more dangerous areas and get out quicker. That's why they also use small dogs, as they were able to get in and out quicker, possibly without being seen.
They also mention the fact that they would routinely, and this is more of a sadder note of this chapter, but they would strap explosives to the dogs.
Yeah, it's unfortunate
because they found that if a dog went into a dangerous area and got injured and couldn't get out, the connection between the handler and the dogs was so strong that the handlers would frequently abandon their posts and go to save their dogs.
Yeah.
And usually it would wind up with the handler also getting killed.
And they couldn't have that.
So they were like, look, we understand. They eventually had to pass some laws about this specific thing. But they said at a certain point, they were like, the best immediate solution is to put an explosive on the dog so that if a dog does get injured, you can at least end its suffering quickly.
Yeah, immediately.
Yeah.
So it's not going to get slowly eaten, or its leg is going to fester and it's going to die that way. And that's it. It's a better death. I mean, it sucks, and of course these handlers loved their animals.
Yeah.
But at least they knew they didn't suffer more than they needed to.
Right. They were like,
it was merciful.
Yeah. They also made it possible. They made it no longer an abandonment of post issue if you went to rescue your partner. Because they didn't refer to them as dogs. They referred to them as their partner.
Right. It was no longer a court-martial offense.
Right.
Because sometimes people went
alone.
Sometimes people went in and rescued and were able to fully rescue their dog, and it was fine.
Right.
But,
and so they were like, obviously this isn't a complete waste.
Right.
But it's still a bigger risk than we're comfortable handling on a regular basis.
Right. But it was just really nice to realize that he provided a really humanistic experience in that moment, just to hear about the dogs and the connection of dogs and how important they were, and just to hear him, because I remember that chapter specifically where I said it would be like he stops to like pet on the dog, or the dog whimpers and he starts talking to her, and it felt like it made you kind of almost remember that we're dealing with just individual people. This is everyday people like you and me that got caught up in this. I mean, everyone got caught up in this. But it wasn't just us that were affected. Everything was affected.
Yeah.
And it was a kind of nice winding down.
It was a humanizing chapter.
It was. It really was. And so much of the book, when you're going through it, because you learn about what happens before, what happens in the middle, and what happens after. So it was really nice to kind of wind yourself down from all the like stress and excitement of listening.
Yeah.
It was just really good. This book was so amazing. It was so much better than I ever could have expected. I really, really enjoyed it. And not just, I didn't just read this in October and Halloween. I mean, I read this a few months ago.
Yeah.
And it was
amazing.
Yeah. I don't think there's any bad time to read this book.
No, there really isn't.
Yeah. It's a great Christmas book. Put you in the cheerful spirit.
I wouldn't read it right before Christmas, but
you don't have to wait for Halloween or like a spooky month, so to speak, to read it. I think it works.
I agree. So, but I think that about covers it, don't you?
I think so. I think
it was an amazing book. I loved it.
I did too.
Highly recommended.
Me too.
I'll eventually read it again.
Oh, I definitely will. It's good enough that it's worth a reread.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
So, thank you guys for listening. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but obviously, if you haven't read it and you really want to read it now, I'll put links in the description below for where you can find copies of the book and stuff like that. So thank you guys for watching, and we'll see y'all next time.
Bye.